the fundamental model of a moral relationship is the relationship between a mother and child. The sole form of true social solidarity among animals. Throughout the class of mammals, there is a continuous increase. Then he notices that, and those of you who didn't pick up on this yet, he is tracing certain teleological features in natural history. All right, and in doing this, some of his arguments are reminiscent of Rolston's argument. Both Rolston and Bookchin interpret natural history teleologically. Okay? And one example of this is Bookchin says that throughout the class of mammals are higher animals, right? There is a continuous increase in the duration of mother-offspring association, which is a consequence of increasing periods of infantile dependence. Saying that, and so because this is the prototypical relationship, a prototypically moral relationship, right? Then those animals who have a longer duration of mother-offspring dependency tend to be species, right? Those species whose lives are characterized by a longer relationship, right? Longer close bonds between mother and offspring tend to be more advanced, tend to be more free, more individuated, more creative, more intelligent, more emotionally sensitive, more capable of altruism among members of their species, right? And even some of them capable of inter-species altruism. So there's something teleological, according to Bookchin, about natural history. Natural history steadily increases more and more species who are characterized, who have these, advanced characteristics of intelligence, creativity, autonomy, interdependence, altruism. All right. And now this is going to sound like Darwin's answer to the originary question: where do moral norms come from? Well, it sounds like Bookchin would say that moral norms come from the biological need among humans, who are these pathetically weak animals, right, for strong bonds of kinship and affection, right, among non-related people. And that's how we survive. Those communities which have strong bonds of cooperation and kinship survive. Those communities who had their Donald Trumps collapsed and disintegrated and went extinct, right? Those communities that encourage narcissism and greed and selfishness and competitiveness, and I've got mine, baby, screw you, you're on your own, buddy, right? If Donald Trump was a goose, he would have let those other geese just, right? Anyway. Remember the goose that had his feathers cut? Right? If Trump was in charge of the goose, the other geese, right? They said, "Help him." Screw it, man. Poor guy, Well, whatever. Anyway. You guys get all sensitive when I talk about politics. No, the professor's not supposed to say stuff like that. Hell with it. We got free speech, man. One of the places where we exercise free speech above all others, is right here. If you can't do it here, then might as well move to something, Anyway. All right. But I don't have any patience with, All right. So mutual aid. Mutual aid customs are a manifestation of ancient human, and they've just been torn down, right? History, the last 200 years, have been characterized by this systematic subversion of mutual aid customs, right? That's really kind of terrifying. Through technology, right? So many of our technologies are corrosive of mutual aid traditions. And capitalism generally is corrosive of mutual, right? 100 years ago, neighbors would get together and help each other build their barns, right? They'd have a barn raising, community gathering, right? Nowadays, you go to Home Depot, right? Everything's commodified, privatized, commercialized, and do you think Home Depot's business might be a little bit affected if mutual aid customs were to enjoy a remarkable resurgence in our society? Probably not. So do you suppose, the economic, the wealth and power that corporations like Home Depot have might be used, to improve human community? Probably not, because the improvement of human community goes against their business interests, right? So they're interested in tearing down human community. which may be a deep and troubling defect of capitalism, but that's beyond my job description. So go to the political science department. All right. Anyway, social ecology has a theory of the relationship between human nature and non-human nature. Human nature is derived from non-human nature, and social evolution from social evolution. All right? The emergence of society is a natural fact that has its origins in the biology of human socialization. Conflicts between civilization and the natural world are the result of corruptions of society and of human nature. So, here Bookchin is responding. Perhaps you could read this. This is his kind of veiled response to deep ecologists who make, from Bookchin's point of view, who make too much of a blanket condemnation of human behavior and are not sensitive enough to the vagaries of history and the fact that 99% of human history, if human cultural history is about 100,000 years old, then only the last 1,000 or 2,000 years of human cultural history have been characterized by this emphasis on competition and greed and narcissism. And by far the more common social arrangement in the history of human culture was an arrangement that emphasized cooperation and togetherness, and we're all in this together, and de-emphasized selfishness. Yes?
So isn't that kind of like contradicting survival of the fittest, like the evolutionary theory? Like, because this, like you're saying that Darwin, wrote this thing about how we got social culture and norms.
Social Darwinism is unfair, is not only totally flawed, that's an explanation of social Darwinism, the way it emerged. It's unfair to both Darwin, because Darwin explained that humans require cooperative engagement with each other in order to survive. And and that was Darwin's answer to the religious zealots of his time who insisted that the altruistic inclinations of the human spirit simply cannot be accounted for by natural history, right? And that natural history is red in tooth and claw. And everyone's just trying to survive, right? And so, social Darwinism is this disgusting, vulgar theory that justifies wealth disparity by saying that this is natural, right? Social Darwinism says that humans are naturally in competition and at each other's throats, right? And the strongest will prevail. And that description of human nature, right? And nature is all red in tooth and claw, is used to justify systems of hierarchical systems and systems of domination, right? That's Bookchin's point. He's going totally against social Darwinism. But social Darwinism is a perversion of Darwinism. Social Darwinism really has social Darwinism is misapplied, and actually it's really should be called Spencerism, named after Herbert Spencer, who came before Darwin, who was a British philosopher, or a British, I'm not sure exactly what he was, but intellectual. And Herbert Spencer was very popular. But Herbert Spencer is the guy who argued that disparities of wealth, economic and social hierarchies are ingrained in the natural order of things and therefore justified. Okay? And you can see how some people might want to graft Darwin on there and say, okay, Darwin's right. But actually Darwin explained that human flourishing depends on cooperation. And so it's really not fair to apply Darwin's evolutionary theory to human society to justify hierarchy and domination, right? That's totally unfair. And it's just vulgar and stupid. It's a stupid idea, right? The idea that that's all there is to nature is competition and domination. It's nonsense, total nonsense. The ecologists and biologists refuted that idea long ago. There's all kinds of cooperation in nature. And sure, the wolves, will prey upon whatever they can, right? They want to attack those moose and kill them and eat them, right? So yeah, there's some kinds of domination going on there. But if you look at the bigger picture, it's not just domination. the wolf packs and the moose herds also have ecologically and evolutionarily a cooperative relationship, right? And so it's not, anyway. But yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. Just remember, social Darwinism is a misnomer. It's an unfair application of Darwin's evolutionary theory, and it really should be Spencerism, Herbert Spencer. Yeah.
Where does Bookchin ever address like instances in pre-industrial societies where, like, for example, there were things like pogroms or like people being cruel to animals, like vast galloping misogyny, things like that?
No, I don't think so. But he would certainly not want to try to whitewash that part of history. Yeah. Someone else had a hand up over here. Yes, Peter.
So when you say social Darwinism, kind of sounds like kind of capitalism is kind of based.
Yeah, well, absolutely, man. It's social Darwinism is this cheeseball effort. It goes kind of like with sociobiology too. We philosophers are just extremely suspicious, and we just cringe when we encounter these scientists, these psychologists and biologists trying to do moral philosophy. It's just, and they haven't even read anything at all, and they just, and then that's so, social Darwinism is just this huge category mistake.
But yeah, I just wanted to make the point, just kind of when we hear you talk about it, it sounds just like capitalism, you know, just kind of. Social
Darwinism is an effort to read the savage social norms, the savagery of the economic and social norms of 20th and 21st century capitalism. Read those norms back into nature, and thereby justify them, right? Through the descriptivist fallacy by saying, well, this is how nature works. This is how nature works. They're all killing each other over there. They're all behave like sharks. They just want to eat each other up and kill each other. They hate each other. And so I like those people who do that here, and I'm going to be a Republican, right?
That's straight out of Fargo.
Yeah, right. It's a descriptivist fallacy. It's an effort, it's smuggling in a normative conclusion. Society ought to be like this, dominated by Donald Trump and just rapaciousness and narcissism and greed, and whatever you can get, go get it. Warp the law, corrupt government, bribe politicians. As long as you get away with it, everything's good, because boys will be boys, and that's how the natural world works, right? It's all competition and bloodthirstiness all over the place, right? And so because that's how nature is, we ought to turn a blind eye to when it goes on in our culture, right? And that's how it ought to be, right? Which is just ridiculous, right? It's not even any effort to defend a normative position. It's just waving your hand and saying, well, this is how things are, boys will be boys. Right?
It doesn't make sense, because if you're saying that's how nature is, you say that for so many things. If I wouldn't pooped outside, I was like, that's how nature is, So
exactly. Tell that to the judge, huh? Right? That crap. Anyway, no pun intended. Yeah. Fascinating. So there were some other hands up too. No.
So why isn't Bookchin like a outward Marxist? Because I feel like under a Marxist, a post-capitalist society, wouldn't there be more important? Obviously, there would be more of an importance towards nature and communities and that type of relationship. It's just because of Marxists just focus on the proletariat taking over.
I think it's more simple than that. I think Bookchin is really reluctant to describe himself as a Marxist because he thinks, rightly or wrongly, he thinks that Marxists tend to overemphasize economic considerations and the relationship between social justice and economic relationships. He thinks that, so Marxists tend to believe that we can achieve social justice by fixing exploitation of the proletariat by the ruling class, right, by the capitalists. And Bookchin argues that there are deeper narratives underlying the hierarchies, and that changing our economic systems, our economic institutions, adopting a more socialistic relationship between, would not solve the kinds of, would not address the ecological crisis. And that So the hierarchical relationships and relations of domination are more comprehensive and deeper than economic relationships. And so, and if the Marxist thinks that, then maybe a lot of Marxists don't think this, but if they do, then Bookchin's going to want to say, you guys are wrong, right? If they think that we can change these deeper structures of hierarchy and domination by changing our economic systems, Bookchin says you're just wrong. We need to go a lot deeper than that. Okay, so that's why he's not a Marxist.
Don't you think that's where it all begins, though? Just because
Sure.
I feel like.
Yeah, and he would be the first guy to say that, right? He's a lifelong union activist, lifelong attempt to advocate for a stronger role of the government in marketplace. So yeah, that could be. He would certainly say that. Maybe that's where it all begins. But he would also be very suspicious, right, of certain examples of 20th century socialist/communist societies who have exhibited, if anything, a far more rapacious relationship with their environment. I mean, some of the environmental harm that was committed in the name of socialism in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was just terrible, right? So as a matter of historical fact, a socialist society, a socialist form of government is still perfectly happy to treat the environment and to exploit and reduce to instrumentalize, right? I mean, their air quality is just terrible in some of those former communist countries. So anyway, Bookchin might be more sensitive, to those kinds of considerations, and those things might incline him more toward an anarchist rather than a socialist position. I don't know. All right. Ecological problems are the result of ecological problems are primarily social problems. And here is where we find his criticisms of deep ecology, the earth firsters. And I guess you can, I believe that this is published in a book. You can find a book that contains this debate. I believe it is a written debate. They wrote a few essays, and they're very instructive, very informative. It's a very good debate to look at. If you're interested in deep ecology and social ecology, go get this debate between Bookchin and Earth First co-founder Dave Foreman. But essentially, Murray Bookchin has a big problem with those deep ecologists who tend to be overly broad in their criticism of humankind. Murray Bookchin always rushes to the defense of the human animal, the beautiful human animal who has been corrupted and perverted by 20th and 21st century capitalist systems. If we were, Murray Bookchin believes that if we were to break our bonds, from this artificial economic system that we're currently indebted to, then we would exhibit far more. We would exhibit characteristics different than the ones we do now, to say the least. All right. So, criticism of all radical environmental movements, which blame human nature and human reason for the environmental crisis, simply to pit society against nature, humanity against the biosphere, prevents us from examining the highly complex differences and divisions within society so necessary to define our problems and their solutions. All right, so this is this little trick. Maybe we're giving them too much credit. I tend to think the ruling elites are primarily just idiots. They don't know anything at all. But if they're capable of making a trick, I don't know if they are or not. Maybe they are. But there does seem to be this false narrative that hovers over the status quo. And a big part of this false narrative is hierarchy and domination being rooted in a certain interpretation of human nature. And social ecologists just want to reject all of this and point out that the trick of every ruling elite from the beginnings of history to modern times has been to identify its own socially created hierarchical systems of domination with community. We were just talking about this, right? Its own. Manufactured, right? These are manufactured hierarchical systems, and there's nothing in nature reflecting anything like what, this domination that we experience here. It's totally artificial, all right? But the trick of the ruling elite are to make common people believe that the hierarchies which we are subjected to are part of nature, right? with the result being that human-made institutions acquire either divine in the old days or in a more skeptical age where we don't accept divine explanations like that anymore, right? We just kind of say, well, that's biology, that's how biology is, right? Okay. A given society and its institutions thus tend to become reified, right? Objectified, solidified, right? Reified means turned into a solid object. Reified into permanent and unchangeable entities that acquire a mysterious life of their own, apart from nature. And all right, we do need to get back to the Snake River, don't we? And what's reminding me of this is that we might have to wait until Thursday. Okay. And then Bookchin has his own understanding of the true role of humans in nature. And he thinks that if humans would simply understand if humans would have a better understanding of evolutionary history and the role that they could play in evolutionary history, then they would embrace their true role, which would be to encourage, right? The true role of human beings is to encourage the natural tendencies of evolutionary history. Okay, and this is where his teleological reading of evolutionary history plays a really important role in his argument, right? Because if he didn't have some account of where nature is where natural history is taking us on its own, right, of the story, other than just what we want, right? That's mainstream ethics, right? Mainstream ethics says the morally good is determined by what we want, right? Bookchin, like all of the objectivists, the meta-ethical objectivists we've studied, is searching for an explanation of right natural resource policy that is not simply based in an appeal to what we want, right? And so he looks to natural evolution, and like Rolston, he identifies these larger teleological features of natural evolution, of natural history, okay? He says that evolution selects for fecundity, diversity, subjectivity, sentience, creativity, intellectuality, self-consciousness, and imaginativeness. And he thinks it's more than coincidental that those mammalian species which are the most recent, which are most recently emerged in the tree of life on Earth happen to be the species whose members have the greatest concentration of these characteristics, right? And which mammalian species is among the youngest of all? I was going to say the youngest, but I don't really know. But we're very young, right? Human animals, we're very young animals. Biologically, about 1 million years old. Interesting. 1 to 3 million, we don't know. So no more than 1 to 3 million. Culturally, 100,000 years. Biologically, about 1 million, maybe 2 million, right? Very, very young species. And lo and behold, we have all that stuff in gigantic quantities, don't we? We don't know because we can't communicate with the cetaceans, the dolphins, and the whales, and we can't do very much with the primates either. But it seems, I think it's a safe guess, it's a safe bet that the human animal has the largest concentrations of those characteristics, right? Human nature is creative, artistic, peaceful, spiritual, augmentative of life, right? Interspecies altruism. You'd expect a philosopher who specializes in ethics to admire those animals that have the greatest amount of altruism, right? Well, there you go. That's why my favorite animal is the human animal. Because I'm a moral philosopher, and so naturally I'm going to admire those characteristics that make up the moral life. And what characteristic makes up altruism? Looms pretty large, right? So those animals that are capable of a high degree of interspecies altruism are going to be on my short list, right, of animals that I admire. So I admire the human animal. Humans evolved to expand the possibilities of life and maximize life's awareness of itself. Okay? These are kind of cosmic statements. Maybe he's making some metaphysical commitments that are beyond his, kin, or something. Who knows? He could be. Bookchin's normative arguments, right? What is he saying? Natural history is teleological. Natural history is marked by tendency, by directions, and as far as humans are concerned, by conscious purpose. Human society is morally obligated. Okay, that's his normative, his essential normative claim. Human society is morally obligated to embody the creativity of nature. So it's just a devastating criticism of our Trumpist mainstream society, right? Just a devastating criticism, right? Because we're doing the opposite of that. We're embodying, you know, stagnation, homogenization, destruction of biodiversity, destruction of nature, right? Reduction of diversity to homogeneity, et cetera, right? Reduction of our psychological landscape, of our cultural landscape, and nothing but, right? 7-Elevens and McDonald's, right? Homogenization of our culture, leveling out of everything, and leveling out of our biodiversity, right? Salmon hatcheries are the best example, right? Just homogenize, just crank out fish, right? That's it. Doesn't matter how diverse or where they come from. Anyway, but all of that goes against the grain of evolutionary history, and that's why all of that is wrong. Okay, that is his hook, right, for cultural criticism. So some very profound, of course, social ecologists have some very, very profound, penetrating, and devastating criticisms of U.S. society. All right. So we have an obligation to embody the creativity of nature. In other words, we are obligated to increase biodiversity. All right, because that's what nature does. Increase of biodiversity is one of the essential tendencies of natural history. Okay. So if humans are to play their proper role, then they are obligated to increase as best as they can, right? In whatever small way that we can. For example, and I have a good example, an example I think is pretty good on the next page, I think, of what humans could do that would be consistent with Bookchin's environmental ethic. All right, we have an obligation to protect, preserve, and restore wildlife habitats, right? And even perhaps a moral obligation to create new habitats where there were none before. That would be very controversial among ecologists. Right? But, for example, releasing salmon into areas where they never existed before. And perhaps that increases biodiversity or perhaps it decreases. We don't really know. I'm inclined to be very conservative on that question, so I'm a little bit skeptical of efforts like that. But I laud, all efforts to increase biodiversity. All right, thwarting the tendencies of natural evolution is bad. Homogenization is bad, and because corporate capitalism is predicated on homogenization, corporate capitalism is pretty darn bad. Okay. Oops. Is that it? Yeah. All right. So natural history is teleological, the evolving totality of non-human nature, of which human culture is a part. All right. So if you are educated ecologically and biologically, then you will recognize what Bookchin has recognized, that natural history has manifestly teleological features. All right, and these are the kinds of teleological features that natural history exhibits. All right, increasing levels of intersubjectivity and cooperation, increasing imagination and creativeness of individuals, increasing self-awareness, right, increasing tendency to bestow names on individuals, and lo and behold, the young mammals, the young species exhibit these tendencies. Did you know dolphins have individual names for each other? Right? They whistle. This was discovered several years ago. That's obvious, right? Why wouldn't they? But yeah, they have names for each other. Susan, Bill, Henry, they just clicks and whistles. They sound different, but that's exactly what they are. So, lo and behold, wow, there's more evidence. Perhaps this is all kind of anecdotal. How could you make a systematic study of this kind of thing? I don't know. Anyway. Humans have moral obligations to manage and care for natural resources in a manner that is consistent with nature's objective teleological features. Okay? That's it. That's his normative argument. We are obligated to care for natural resources in a manner that is consistent with nature's objective teleological features. And so he insists that these are nature's objective teleological features. Okay? So this is what we strive to make our resource management decisions consistent with. All right? And that means we are obligated to protect biodiversity, habitats. We are obligated to restore where possible. Okay? hint, hint, Snake River dams, create or open up entirely new habitats for wildlife, right? If possible, right? And that's where it's kind of controversial. Who knows what native species were affected? But in 1967, the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Oregon here constructed a fish passage facility. And before that, I think spring chinook and winter coho were the only species that could get up the falls, could get up, to the main part of the river where there's really a lot of spawning habitat, spawning and rearing habitat up there. Anyway, but after the Fish and Wildlife folks put that fish ladder in there, they introduced some other. And arguably, maybe a Bookchinian social ecologist might point to that, say, hey, that's a good example, that's what I mean, right? Humans are actually doing things to make it easier for new species to colonize some habitat that they couldn't colonize, right? So that might be the sort of beyond restoration, right? I mean, protection is one level, and then restoration of stuff that used to be there but got got damaged by humans, and then maybe even beyond restoration, opening up new areas that humans really didn't have anything to do with, but maybe have the power to open up. All right. So the social ecologists are rightly criticized by the Rush Limbaugh types, or whoever the hell is taking over for Rush Limbaugh these days, as watermelons. It's supposed to be pejorative, but perhaps it's instructive to think of oneself in this way. Green on the outside, red on the inside. The social ecologist says that politically, the environmentalist must become a dedicated social justice activist. Okay, so without social justice, the goals of the radical environmental movement will never be achieved. Okay, so our first love may be the beautiful rivers and streams and salmon runs and the beautiful animals, and so maybe that's our first love, and that's what we wear on the outside, which is our affinities with what the radical environmentalists are trying to teach us. But Bookchin says you can't, you got to be left. You got to be left on the inside, because the social justice movement is the only movement, not the environmental movement. Too much of the North American 20th century environmental movement is characterized by wilderness preservation and movements which serve to reinforce dichotomies between humans and the natural world, dichotomies between nature and culture, right? So the social ecologists say that environmentalists need to reconnect, make strong connections with the social justice movement. So you might hear this term environmental justice. The environmental justice movement is an offshoot of the social ecology. If anything, you could say environmental justice, which is a political movement, is an offshoot of social ecology, which is a moral philosophical movement. Okay?